Despite the fact that I prefer Pathfinder 2e, my rules lawyer moniker, and the fact that I recommend to new players that they do not tinker blindingly with the rules when starting out, I present today my 20 house rules for Pathfinder 2e. I'm Ronald the Rules Lawyer, a lawyer who runs tabletop role-playing games. Support my Patreon. I don't make money as an attorney. For an explanation as to why, look at the video whose thumbnail is on the screen. Supporting my Patreon gives you ad-free early access to most of my videos and exclusive content. My cred is that I've run over 500 sessions of Pathfinder 2e professionally, and I also published a video early in the life of my channel, 5 rules to ignore in Pathfinder, and most of the rules I said to ignore have been changed since. So that's enough preamble, let's jump into my house rules. The first one is actually not a house rule because it's officially sanctioned in the book, and today's video's other purpose is to show you how to run it like Ronald. And it's on how I run critical hit damage. I double the dice. The book by default says to add up everything and add modifiers, then to double everything. But dice are cool, dice are fun. We love our math rocks. I like to double the dice. Plus it's more mathematically stable. Who wants to roll a critical hit, get all excited, and roll minimum damage? Moving into the actual house rules, I'll let you know that the first two are much more extensive than the rest. First is Ronald's rules of aiding. I do not run aid as written in Pathfinder. I did a not very long for me video about this, and link in the description. Right now, aiding an ally on an action is always a DC 15 check. You get no benefit on a failure, and the bonus you confer on a critical success is +2, and it increases as your proficiency with what you're using to aid increases. Because it's always DC 15, it becomes an automatic +4, which is huge in this system once you get to the higher levels. While at low levels, which is where new players to the system are at, when you want to encourage players to think beyond their own character and start working as a team, aid is much less useful. Before the remaster, the DC was actually 20, and it was quite likely would critically fail. Even with the DC lowering, it doesn't quite compete with other actions competing for your third action. So how do I run it? Well, the DC for aid is the same as that of the main check, however, the GM can change this when appropriate. A critical success gives you a +4 at level 1, a success gives a +2, a failure gives a +1, so it's still helpful on a regular failure, and critical failure is the same. Because this generally makes aid more impactful and your role matter throughout all the levels, the feats, usually ancestry feats that give you a bonus when you aid an ally, I have lowered the bonus, usually by 1/2. Things like the human feat cooperative nature, which gives you a +4 bonus to aid, I generally reduce those bonuses by half. My second house rule is to make recall knowledge more generous. It was improved in the remaster, but I still think it needs to be incentivized more to players. Let's say the players encounter this creature. Right now, the player needs to declare what skill they're using, and seeing that it's made out of bones, they reasonably assume it's undead, so they use their religion skill. The GM sets the DC to 18, which is the standard DC for this level 3 creature. If the player succeeds, they get info. If they attempt a second recall knowledge, the DC escalates each time, and also, if they fail any check, then they can never attempt recall knowledge on this creature again. Well, when the player decides to use religion in this instance, they're SOL because that wasn't an undead, that was a construct. Loser! I don't think it makes sense to have the player choose a skill. Also, I don't think it always makes sense to use the standard DC of the monster's level. You might want basic information that you would have known at a much lower level. And recall knowledge can be quite painful against creatures that are higher level than the party. The very creatures that GMs want to encourage players to use recall knowledge against, to gather intel, to tilt the battle in their favor. So I buff recall knowledge in my games. So this is what I do. First, the player does not have to declare what skill they're using. This does mean the GM needs to have their own cheat sheet of people's modifiers. Then, if they're recalling knowledge about the monster that they're facing, I note the result, and first I check it against the standard DC based on that creature's level for purposes of identifying what that creature is. Regardless of whether they succeed on that, I then find out what their question about the creature is. The DC for that may not be the same. For example, for a level 10 Ghost Mage, the player might ask, what is a way to bypass the damage resistance of this incorporeal creature? Well, there are standard ways to do that in this game that don't really vary, that are true about creatures as low as the level 4 Ghost Commoner. So maybe the DC is only 19. Or the GM can use the simple DC chart and say maybe this is an expert check and say DC 20. Now, there are certain actions in this game that give what I'll call today rider benefits, some additional benefit on a recall knowledge check. A mastermind rogue, when they recall knowledge successfully, make that creature off guard to them. Or rangers with the monster hunter feat, if they critically succeed, they give themselves and their allies a +1 circumstance bonus on their next attack against that creature. For the purpose of that specifically, I make level matter and use the level-based DC. A couple of other things. On a regular failure, I consider giving less useful information, maybe information on something they didn't ask for, or something more vague. Also, I don't escalate the DC in combat. I don't see a balanced reason for that, and I think that reflects the stress of combat. You're not always going to recall things perfectly in a life and death situation. People need time to remember what they know. On the same theme, I allow a repeat attempt if they fail in combat. And an alternate consequence to critically failing, instead of giving false info to the player, which is optional now, by the way, you can deny repeat attempts. Okay, those first two were long. They get shorter from here. The investigate exploration activity, where a character uses one of their skills to think about the environment. First, you don't have to declare what skill you're using. I always thought that was a weird requirement. Second, when combat starts, you get to do a free recall knowledge. I allow you to do that as a free action on the start of your first turn in combat. Number 4, I give a little buff to the defend and scout exploration activities. In addition to their usual benefits, when combat starts, you always are able to use a reaction even before your first turn. This just reflects your readiness to take action when combat starts. Number 5 is the monster special ability Grab. Monsters, not PCs, can sometimes have this ability. Before the remaster, they could spend an action after successfully striking you to automatically succeed on either a grab, trip, or shove. The remaster changed this so that they have to roll a check using the corresponding athletics action, for reasons I won't go into here. Another thing about the grab special ability is that it's not affected by the multiple attack penalty and it doesn't contribute to it. But the main issue I have with this is that a critical success on a grapple restrains the PC. This is a devastating condition that prevents them from doing nearly everything. All they can do usually is try to escape from it. Also, on the monster's next turn, they can spend an action to automatically extend the condition. No check needed. This becomes very dangerous when a party encounters a higher level creature. Let's say a level 3 party encounters this level 6 cave bear, which has, because it has an athletics bonus of +16, a DC of 26 to escape its grab. And at level 3, characters tend to have a +9 or +10 at their disposal. If the bear continues to restrain you, there's likely a 75% chance you lose your entire turn, and even if you escape, your options are much more limited. This is a big buff to certain creatures that isn't nearly as true for those with the trip special ability or the push ability. Against a typical 4-person party, this can be devastating and lead to a vicious cycle. Another example is the level 18 Kraken. Let's imagine that they encounter a level 15 party. They have a special ability that allows them for one action to attack with their tentacles twice, and they're both at their full attack bonus, and then they can use grab to try to grapple all the creatures that they hit. It also has an extreme athletics bonus for its level of +38, so against a level 15 frontliner fighter who might have a high constitution, whose fortitude DC might be 37, that's a 60% chance of critically succeeding and restraining the fighter, and it'll be much higher for other characters. And it can use this action next turn to automatically sustain it against one of them. And the DC to escape this tentacle is the beyond legendary number of 48. Pretty much every character would need a natural 20 at this point. And then there are other monsters that have the improved grab special ability that lets them grab and restrain you as a free action when they strike you. So what do? Well, when I think it is too much for the party, I disallow the critical success result if the monster is higher level. At least on this special ability, they could still use the regular grapple action. Also, if I think they can manage it, I don't make this change, and I consider giving them more XP for the fight. And that leads into number 6, XP by feel. Let's say a level 1 party has a very harrowing fight against a giant scorpion with its poisoned ability and reactive strike. One or two characters were near death, or maybe there even was a death. Well, by the rules, this was only 2 levels above the party, and so it was a moderate encounter for 80 XP. Fuck that. This was at least a severe encounter. Or what about a fight where luck went against the party severely and the party overcame the odds? Bump it up. And maybe bump it down if the opposite is true, but only do that if you think that the players would be leveling up too fast otherwise. Next are a few things that I ban or nerf. Things like specific spells, and I generally did not want to have many examples of that because they might be eroded. Let these examples convey a philosophy that if you find that something needs some retuning, to consider doing so. I'm sure there are things I don't cover today that I might discover tomorrow. Number 7, the Garden of Healing focus spell, one of the potential focus spells for the Animist. You spend 1 action to heal 1d4 hit points to every creature in an emanation, and you can sustain this up to a minute to give the same effect each time. This is okay in an encounter, but between fights, this is busted. At level 1, you can heal the entire party 25 hit points each without a check needed, and this scales up to 250 at the highest levels. You can do it every 10 minutes also. This is way above the curve and beyond what the game normally expects you to have. In my games where I have an Animist, I use Torrent in the Blood, the Kineticist ability, as a model for how much an ability like this should heal. So in Exploration mode, I lower the amount it heals to 1d8 per spell rank. Also, if it's cast during combat, after combat ends, I allow the casters to sustain it 1 more time. Next is a controversial one, and something I've complained about on my channel. The Wood Kineticist has an impulse that it can take called Timber Sentinel that lets them cast a level 1 spell, Protector Tree, at will, basically. This negates a lot of damage coming from strikes. Unless I'm mistaken, this is the one instance in the game that lets you cast a spell at maximum rank at will. So I've seen it happen where, let's say in a level 10 campaign, the party encountering a monster that relies on its strikes will plop down a Protector Tree and basically give 50 hit points to the party. The monster tries to attack the player character, sees the tree block the damage, and then focuses its attention on the tree, wasting its most accurate attacks basically on this tree. And once they're done with the tree, the Kineticist plops down another one. Now, I have not actually taken action against it in my games. The reason being, in the adventure paths I've been running, which have some brutal encounters, I haven't felt it's been necessary to lessen the defensive power of the party. So what to do if you think you should nerf this ability? Well, one suggestion is just to limit it to once per 10 minutes. Another is to affect its action economy and make it cost 3 actions, or to give it the overflow trait, or maybe both. I don't have a set opinion on this, and I'm sure people will argue over this in the comments anyway. Number 9 is Tailwind. Ugh, Tailwind. I have 0 doubt here. As written, it allows you to have a plus 10 foot status bonus to your speed for 1 hour, and if it's heightened to 2nd rank, it is 8 hours, and that outlasts the typical adventuring day. Increasing your speed is immensely powerful in the system where movement costs an action. And, okay, it has to be cast on yourself, and not everybody is a spellcaster, but everybody can take the trick magic item, Skill Feat. And by the time you get to the mid-levels, a level 5 wand that has Tailwind that you can cast every single day, its cost becomes trivial. I won't do a deep dive as to why I dislike this, but suffice it to say that this trivializes class features and other key character choices, and I already find that by the high levels that players outpace, literally, many monsters that they encounter. They don't need a further boost. What about nerfing this? Well, I haven't seen anyone bring up an idea, because the main problem with it is the duration, and Fleet Step already exists in the game, which gives a 30-foot bonus for 1 minute. And I don't see players clamoring for Fleet Step wands, so this just lives on as a ban. Next is the spell Spiritual Anamnesis. I won't say much about it aside from the fact that it's above the curve, and it takes Slow, an already strong spell, and puts it on steroids. Now, I realize these, what I call spot nerfs and bans, are a slippery slope, because Slow itself, I haven't banned, and it's a very strong spell that's above the curve. Heightened to 6th rank, it can target up to 10 creatures. I haven't touched Slow, and I think players would oppose a nerf to it, but what if a party encounters a higher level spellcaster who has an extreme spell DC, which is the book's recommendation to give them, and they cast this on the entire party, and the critical failure effect of it is to be slowed to for a minute? How would players feel then? Ugh, I don't know about this, and I'm just going to put this out there. I'm not going to give its own number, but maybe the failure effect should give them a new saving throw at the end of their turn, kind of like how Paralysis or the Dominate spell work. And the critical failure effect should just be slowed 1 for a minute. Which dovetails into another controversial nerf I think is needed, which is to the Resentment Witch subclass. They have a very powerful familiar. It's called the Familiar of Ongoing Misery, and whether it's the monster's misery or the misery of the GM is not indicated. Whenever they cast or sustain a hex, a creature within 15 feet of the familiar, if they have any negative conditions, all of their negative conditions that have a duration are extended by 1 round. Now, this has devastating synergy with the Slow spell that we just looked at and Synesthesia, and I'm sure other spells that I haven't thought about, where if the monster succeeds on their save but doesn't critically succeed, they have the bullshit happen to them for 1 round only. Well, this familiar ability can make it last the whole combat, and it definitely outclasses the other familiar abilities for the other witch subclasses. You can pile on the debuffs. Even the grabbed and restrained conditions are extended by a round, by rules as written. The argument I see online is, well, attack the familiar. Well, the familiar has the same defenses as the witch, and if you give it certain familiar abilities, its hit points will be comparable to the witch's. When used right, this ability can take a boss creature who's a couple levels or more above the party and completely alter their threat level. I haven't had this come up in any of my games yet, I think because the players know I would probably nerf it. So I can't present a tried and tested fix, but one that I've heard about is to allow a saving throw for the monster when this effect is used, which would seem to address the particular problem of how it affects higher level creatures. All right, moving on from bans and nerfs, let's go to recovering from knockouts. By rule, when you are healed back from dying, you act normally on your next turn. What I do is that if at least 1 round has passed since you were knocked out, you may jump back into initiative. If not, you just wait until your turn comes up, but you cannot use reactions until you jump back in. This is just common sense to me, and if you don't do this house rule, it means that their recovery time is dependent on when in the initiative you heal them. It's kind of gamey and weird. Next, right now, falling 6 feet can lead to your death. The rules say that if you fall more than 5 feet, then you take bludgeoning damage equal to half the distance you fell. I had a more complex proposal on how to fix this in an earlier video, but today I have a simpler solution. I think most healthy people, let alone adventurers who are trained for combat, can jump down from a height of 6 feet without taking damage. So what do? Well, I just alter the leap action, the horizontal leap, so that an additional benefit is that if you land at a lower height, you lessen your fall by 5 feet. No skill check needed. This means that you do have to dedicate an action if you are going down a certain height. And I think it relatively accurately reflects what athletic people can do. Next, targeting concealed and hidden allies. By rule, you need to roll a DC 5 flat check or DC 11 flat check to target that ally. Well, what if they're right next to you physically or within your reach? Well, it would suck if you cast a 2-action heal spell against your ally who's right next to you and fail to target them. So I allow an action to try to find an ally, and basically also to just check a square for anything in it. And once you find that ally, no targeting check is needed to do some effect on them. Also, I've seen the question come up, are you hidden to yourself or concealed to yourself? I don't know what the rules say, but I say no. Life's hard enough. Okay, next. Restrictions requiring stride actions. Now, what am I talking about here? There are abilities in this game that specifically allow you to take a stride action, which in this game is using your land speed. So here's this level 4 Ranger feat, Mature Animal Companion, that makes it so that if you don't spend an action on your turn to command your companion, they can still do a stride or strike action. That's nice, but what if your companion is a bird who's in midair? Well, now you haven't commanded them and they fall to the ground. Well, that's silly, and what I would do is I would allow that bird to fly and hover midair for free. Whether or not you have this feat, in fact, I would be open to this feat letting them fly a distance, in fact. Similarly, if you have a swimming companion like a shark, for example, let them stay afloat. There are other effects in this game that specifically say stride, like the haste spell, that are usually there for valid balance reasons. I don't change those. I only intervene to prevent ridiculous situations like this. Next is a change to the Fascinated condition, already a condition that doesn't come up in many battles because it's relatively weak. It gives a penalty to perception and skill checks, and you cannot use concentrate actions unless it involves the source of your fascination. Well, the problem here is that the condition ends if a creature uses hostile actions against you or any of your allies. And it says any creature. The hostile action can come from you. Let's say your party successfully fascinates several foes. The first one to act slaps one of their allies or slaps itself, and now all of them lose the fascinated condition. The condition already is arguably not that impactful, so I just remove that part. The hostile action must come from someone else and be against you for you to snap out of it. Next is I keep voluntary flaws in my campaigns. Early in the life of Pathfinder 2e, there was this option. You could take 2 flaws to your stats in exchange for 1 boost, so long as the net effect on any one of your ability scores was not above +1 or below -1. Right now, an elf gives you a penalty to Constitution, but what if you want to be a kineticist with a +4 to Constitution because that's its key attribute? The current rules allow your elf to take instead 2 free boosts and not have these modifiers you see on the screen. But I'm like, I like having the flavor of having these attribute modifiers. So my players have an extra option in their game of using the voluntary flaws. So this player might want to put -1 in strength and charisma to boost their constitution up so that they can eventually get a +4 at level 1. Now, arguably, this is vulnerable to min-maxing. However, the effect is relatively small, in my opinion. Next, I allow monks to have a special dodge action. It's considered optimal as a monk to actually wield a shield in this game, because you already have excellent action economy with Flurry of Blows. Why not have a shield to increase your armor class by 2? But that's thematically weird and doesn't fit the fantasy of a monk in my mind. So why not have them get the same effect through their martial arts ability of raising your shield by spending an action? So that's my house rule. This does not work, obviously, with feats like Shield Block. You need to have an actual shield for that. Note that since having a free hand in the system is advantageous, it allows you to do athletics maneuvers, for example. A monk who chooses to use this action must act as if one of their hands is occupied by a shield. On a similar note, there are certain classes that can conceal their spellcasting because they have a class feat called Conceal Spell. A spell-shaped feat, they spend an extra action before casting a spell to give it the subtle trait. The spellcasting itself is not apparent to observers. Well, this feat is only available to witches and wizards. That means the psychic cannot do hidden spells, and that's weird. It seems like an omission to me, and come on, mind control! So I allow psychics to take this feat, and also possibly other classes. Maybe the bard should too. Also, I do wonder if maybe this should be a level 7 deception skill feat that you must be master in deception to take, which would mean it's not class restricted. I'm just putting that out there as food for thought. Next, number 20, the automatic bonus progression variant rule. This is the one that automatically gives the party bonuses to their attacks and defenses and skills in accord with the levels that the game expects you to find magic items that give you those bonuses at those levels. It removes the need to get magic items to keep up with the math. But the official variant rule seems to use a sledgehammer where a regular hammer might be appropriate. It removes all item bonuses from the game except for armor item bonuses. This screws over alchemists who rely on making items that give item bonuses to a lot of their party members, and the kineticists, which relies on the item bonus from gate attenuators to boost your impulses. So I use the popular variant of this variant rule called automatic rune progression. Basically, it gives for free the fundamental weapon and armor runes to the party when they attain those levels, including the hand wrap of mighty blows for unarmed attacks. And that's it. No other changes. So you still need to get items to improve your skills numerically. So it means that skill boosting items are still meaningful, and it does not screw over certain classes. Number 21. You didn't watch a Rules Lawyer video expecting me to stick to 20, did you? Gradual attribute boosts, which actually was an official variant rule before the remaster, but did not live on a GM core, and that surprised me when I planned this video. But basically, by rule, you get 4 ability boosts or attribute boosts every 5 levels, level 5, 10, and so on. And this variant rule lets you start getting that set of 4 boosts from level 5, starting at level 2. So you get to boost 1 stat at level 2, another at 3, 4, and 5. Same with the later sets. I like this. It gives a boost to low-level characters when they're at their most vulnerable and when they're still getting their build online, and it makes builds that could use a strong second stat more viable much earlier. However, I didn't like the big boost that happened at level 7 when you can make your primary attribute +5, which also coincided when spellcasters usually got expert proficiency with their spellcasting. So my variant of this official variant rule, which is quasi-official because it didn't live on in GM Core, is to not allow a +5 until level 10, no second +5 until level 15, and no +6 until level 20. Number 22 is an optional way to use the official free archetype variant rule. This is the one that gives you a free feat every even number level that must be used on archetype feats. Well, at some of my tables, I allow you to get your first archetype dedication feat at level 1. Any dedication feat that gives you expert proficiency in something, that part is delayed until level 2. There's some cases where your table might find this appropriate, like maybe a character's backstory has them studying martial skills and spells while growing up. It's also appropriate for certain origin archetypes. In my Bloodlords campaign, where most of my party members were undead and needed the undead archetype dedication feat for that to be expressed mechanically, it made sense for them to have their undead archetype feat at level 1. Now, this is a bump in power, yes, but this is at level 1 when they are more fragile than they will be at higher levels. So that's it, my list is done, and now some final thoughts. I don't have many. This was by nature a video that covered many different things. I don't have any thoughts tying this all together. But I'd like to know what you think. Do you agree with some of these house rules? Do you disagree with some of them? And do you have house rules to address things that I haven't addressed in this video? Also, I want to suggest one of my videos called Ronald's Rules of Rolling. It's not a house rule, but it's key to how I run Pathfinder at my tables. Despite the thumbnail, it's not necessarily to stop cheating. I definitely use it against my middle school students for that reason, but to avoid arguments and having ambiguity at the table. Things like someone's verbalized intention being what they definitely do, no matter what they click in Foundry. So support my Patreon if you haven't already. It allows me to continue my channel. Also join my Discord. There are thousands of us. I hang out there a lot. We talk Pathfinder 2e and other gaming. And you can play Pathfinder 2e with our drop-in, drop-out organized play system called Endless Tale Tavern. So that's it. I've been Ronald the Rules Lawyer. See you next time.